Imagine not being able to read the paper because your hands were shaking. Imagine not being able to read newsprint as your world faded to black. The National Federation of the Blind, Newsline, Indiana. With your host, Lee Martin, and co-host, Florence Myers-McSwine.
Well, welcome to this week's segment of the National Federation of the Blind, Newsline, Indiana. And we have a continuation of last week's show. So we have with us last week's guest, Mr. Lou Moneymaker, President and CEO of Bosma Enterprises, back again. We have a lot of questions we'd like to ask him.
We have a lot of questions. Before we go to those questions, once again, we want to talk about the National Federation of the Blind Newsline here in Indiana and around the country, as well as around the world. You can read newspaper publications, over 400 newspaper publications, and over 70 different magazines. We also have international newspapers that you can read. A person that is blind, visually impaired, and even the deaf-blind, even those that have certain forms of dyslexia can utilize this free service. And it's a service that you can apply for through the numbers that you see on the screen or the numbers that you hear on the screen. You can contact us and learn more about this fantastic free service, because I get a kick out of being able to read about some of the topics that we're talking about today is sports. We've also mentioned a little things about politics, daily living that we all go through. And if you just want to know about business, enterprises, and anything of that nature, we now, as blind citizens and print-challenged citizens, have the opportunity to pick up your landline telephone, to utilize your Victor Reader Streams, your smartphones. There's also an app for the NFB Newsline that you can readily use, as well as your computer. So there's a number of ways that you can access this free service. And I tell you, consumers are really enjoying it. And I'm interested in learning and reading more as far as the sports. So we'll be right back to talk a little bit more with our guest, the President and CEO of Bosma Enterprises, Mr. Lou Moneymaker. So stay tuned.
I just graduated college as a blind student. How can I independently find job listings?
Thanks to the National Federation of the Blind, visually impaired Hoosiers can hear newspapers, circulars, and magazines from across the globe.
It is a fantastic service.
Learn more by calling 855-963-6476 or visit nfbnewsline-in.org.
We are the nation's blind, and we read NFB Newsline.
Well, welcome back to our show. And just to top off the question that I had from last week's show, Mr. Moneymaker, I wanted to ask you about sports. Are there particular sports that children who are blind and visually impaired cannot or should not participate in?
Well, we like to think that any sport can be adapted for disability participation. And I think people who are into disabled sports really, really, really strive to see that if kids want to get experiences, or adults want to get experiences in certain sports, that we figure out a way to make that happen. Now, there are some things that, as in any sport, whether it's for someone who's blind or someone who's fully sighted, you have to be aware of safety first, always. So in today's world, as an example, I would not encourage someone who's blind, totally blind, to become a pole vaulter. There would be inherent danger and risk involved. So you just have to use your head. So you think, okay, and if somebody was blind and wanted to pole vault, how could we adapt that activity so that the person could get the person who's blind could get the same thing from it as a person who's sighted, but we also have to do that in an efficient and safe manner. So it's a lot about imagination. It's about, as an example, when I am working with someone who's blind, I don't perseverate on inability, I perseverate on ability. Mm-hmm. What can this person do, mm-hmm. you know? And not what they can't do. That doesn't get you anywhere, you know? And so the same thing with sports. We've adapted so many things so that folks who are blind or people who have other disabilities get the same experience as someone who's not disabled or who is fully sighted. So it's a matter of figuring it out, Florence, mm-hmm. you know. And until you have to say no to some things until you do, you know.
And you know, you brought up a very important point there about imagination. Mm-hmm. You know, because even in mainstream, a lot of the advantages we have as sighted individuals, all have come from forms of thinking out the box. Yeah. You know, we all have to use some form of adaptive technology, mm-hmm. and people don't realize, you know, even from the from turning on your lights mm-hmm. To using the smartphones, everyone has them, you know, and to be inclusive, and you know, sports and has been great leader in changing what it means to be blind and integrating into society. People that are different. And I tell you, I've seen people and heard people, the jubilation that they have from being able to compete. You know, so, I mean, because some of the sports that we talk about that we do compete in a lot that I've been hearing is like you said, wrestling, track, beat baseball.
Great adaptation.
Swimming. We've had a guest on, Daniel, several weeks ago, talking about the blind hockey mm-hmm. and leagues that's around the country. So, you know, there's a number of ways that sports can be integrated into mainstream society and, you know, very competitive. So let's move on to Bosma Enterprises and how you became introduced to Bosma and become the president, you know, your road into becoming president and CEO.
Yeah, so I had spent 33 years in education. Kind of wanted to go down a different avenue while I was still able to do so. And thought I'd get into the world of business, was brokering a deal to do that. And actually my wife asked me about why I hadn't applied for the job at Bosma Enterprises. And I didn't have a good answer for her. Okay, so many times she's a lot wiser than I am, so I think I'll follow her lead. You know, and so I applied for the job. And really much to my surprise, because I didn't have a business background, I was made an offer of president and CEO, and I took it. So I retired from 33 years of work at School for the Blind, as I said earlier, on a Friday, and started the job on Monday. And once again, entered into an environment where I was going to have to learn immense amounts about business. When I came to BOSMA, it was a small operation, and one of the joys of the work there is I had spent all my working life training young people who were blind or visually impaired to try to go out into that world and make it. And now I found myself on the other side where I could employ people who were blind or visually impaired, or train people for other work who were blind or visually impaired. So it's almost like a full circle, and it's been a really great journey. I've been at it now for going on 18 years, and I like to think that we've made a difference in the lives of people who are blind and visually impaired with all that we offer at BOSMA Enterprises.
Now, you spoke on employment. You know, the statistics state that there's 70% unemployment in the blind community as a nation. Mm-hmm. And can you imagine how devastating that would be to have such a high percentage in mainstream across this country?
Country would collapse.
It would collapse.
Yeah.
So you guys do a lot of work there at BOSMA. You have individuals, as you said, come into the BOSMA Enterprises that are basically new to blindness. How does that process actually work to get someone into the rehab portion of it all?
So we get referrals about people who are blind or visually impaired from a lot of different sources. Probably the largest source of referrals that we have is through vocational rehabilitation services in the state of Indiana. They will, a person who has lost their vision will go to Voc Rehab to try to find out what the next steps are. And if they're blind, visually impaired, Voc Rehab may refer them to us. That's where most of our referrals come from. However, we reverse that as well. If someone is referred to us by a doctor to BOSMA Enterprises, by a doctor, by a family member, by a friend, whatever the case may be, and we bring them in and meet with them, and they need our services, we'll then guide that person to Voc Rehab to get a case opened so that they can get support from vocational rehabilitation services through the state of Indiana as well. And so that's how people get to us.
Mm-hmm. Now, there's been a number of changes made with the vocational rehabilitation services and how people qualify for the service. And we're going to come back from break and talk a little bit about that. So we're going to take a pause for the call, so we'll be right back.
If you or someone you know is visually impaired or print challenged, the National Federation of the Blind has a resource you need.
I use NFB Newsline when reading Hammond Northwest Times.
Using NFB Newsline, I read the Christian Science magazine.
Dad, you read Jerusalem Post too.
Learn more by calling 855-963-6476 or visit nfbnewsline-in.org.
Live the life you want. Read NFB Newsline.
It's free.
With my failing eyesight, I'm not able to read regular newspapers, and I'm not able to keep up with obituaries.
I've been a homemaker all of my life, but since my vision has failed, I wish I could read my favorite magazines.
Have you heard of the NFB Newsline?
Learn more by calling 855-963-6476 or visit nfbnewsline-in.org.
Subscribe free to NFB Newsline today.
Welcome back to our show, and I'm just going to jump right in with this question for you, Mr. Moneymaker, concerning the vocational rehabilitation services and the order of selection.
Okay, order of selection. So order selection is a concept that's been put into place through state government that classifies your level of disability. And so it classifies you, I'll put it in terms for the listening and viewing public of this program. Most disabled, moderately disabled, least disabled. Those are three categories that comprise order of selection. And basically, what state is doing, Vocational Rehabilitation Services, is providing funding for these really necessary services predicated upon your level of disability. And currently, there is a pretty good representation of people who are the most severely disabled getting services. But people who are not as severely disabled, yet disabled nonetheless, by and large are being denied the services, and much of that gets tied to funding, etc. But for a person such as myself and other people who are in the world of disability, what we see is those people who are not as disabled but still confronting disability and the issues that surround that are being left behind.
Okay.
And so, great example, the number of people in the future that we will serve through BOSMA Enterprises and our programs is likely to decline because we have been providing services for people who are disabled regardless of the level of disability. I mean, you reach a certain point where you have to have these services. And many of the people who need the services simply aren't getting them because there's no funding stream behind them from the state. So when we bring people in for services at BOSMA Enterprises, the state funds them to the level that the state funds, and then we fund them out of our business side for the remainder of their services. We philosophically feel that people who are blind, this is me personally speaking now, people who are blind have a couple strikes against them when they go out in seeking a job in the world of employment. Number one is the employers are generally people who are fully sighted, and they have a lot of preconceived notions about blindness that just aren't correct. And that creates such an issue. There's no opportunity given, and without the opportunity, you can't change the person's mind, okay? And that's as for people who are low vision, it's just as difficult for employment almost as it is for someone who's totally blind. And so I remain in contact with much of the blind community, and I get emails, as an example, that says this message. Well, I can see very little, but I see too much to get support through vocational rehabilitation to refer me for services. They can refer, but they won't fund. Our company, we're a not-for-profit, we make a positive bottom line, and that money is spent to either reinvest in the company and grow it so that we can provide more training, more employment. And the other part of the money that is what we call a net profit, we put that into our program services so that we can get the level of training much higher than if we just have the resources that's provided by the state. So a person who has 2 strikes against them when they go out in the world of work they can't be successful without training, and they can't be successful with mediocre training. So we look at that training needs to be at the highest level. When you're facing a 70% unemployment rate, people have to be ready, really ready to get out there to be able to compete for employment. And so the sad part is lots of people who are disabled, inclusive obviously of people who are blind or visually impaired, are falling through the cracks.
Falling through the cracks.
And what happens? Then they have to go on to some sort of public funding. So in the long run, in the short term, it's cheaper. In the long run, it costs the government and consequently the taxpayers more money than if we were spending extra money putting people to training and then putting them to work and converting them from tax takers to taxpayers.
But you know, there's stated that there is a movement in our government, Congress, as well as our legislative branches to put that model into place, to where individuals still won't receive the services. You receive Social Security, and so you should be satisfied with Social Security. So education and jobs and training for jobs is not for you. You should be satisfied with sitting at home, receiving Social Security, and not having a true life to be out here being competitive and earning a living wage.
Yeah, Lee, I ask myself the same question, and I'll ask you the same question. How satisfied would you be sitting at home?
You know already, Lou.
Part of what defines us in our life is our employment. It's a critical piece of our entire life system, and that's being, in essence, that's being denied because of some of the movements that are going on now.
And it's also, it expands itself to different agencies that are out here that say that they represent the disabled communities, but we still need to pull these entities together so that we can address this issue of those that are falling through the cracks. I mean, it's...
Some that are falling through the cracks are those who are newly blind.
Yes. Sometimes I think we forget. So the example that I gave earlier that was talking about Paralympism, and that we only started getting traction in that movement when the disability groups all came together. Now, I can tell you that if disability groups could get on the same page about some of these issues, you're talking about tens of millions of votes. Part of the reason that disability hasn't, through its legislation, there's been a lot of legislation that's been passed. Rehab Act in '73, the ADA and all of its variations and updates through the year, but it hasn't improved the unemployment rate of people who are disabled and or people who are blind. So we're doing something wrong, and we're not, and we're allowing people who are disabled to fall through the cracks. The most powerful thing that could be done to prevent that and cure that is for all the disability groups to come together. They become a powerful force when they do.
Wow.
And they can dictate policy when they do, because politicians need your vote. But it's still fragmented. We're still arguing amongst one another. And so we cannot be as powerful as we should be. I say we because I'm 50 years into working inside disability. I know as much about blindness, as an example, as any other fully sighted person. I don't know about blindness as a person who's blind. Okay, and I don't
But you
profess
advocate
to.
well. You advocate well for us. And we're going to take a short break here and come back with the conclusion of our show. But we covered a lot of stuff, but we still have a ton of stuff that we'd like to cover. So we'll come back and give some direction as to what, where you can go find out more information that we're discussing. So stay tuned.
If you or someone you know is visually impaired or print challenged, the National Federation of the Blind has a resource you need.
I am a CFP practitioner, and I happen to be blind. I rely on NFB Newsline to keep me current with Wall Street Journal and the Financial Times.
Hoosiers can hear Indiana magazines, circulars, national magazines, and information from across the globe. Learn more by calling 855-963-6476 or visit nfbnewsline-in.org.
The National Federation of the Blind knows that blindness is not the characteristic that defines you or your future. Every day we raise the expectations of blind people because low expectations create obstacles between blind people and our dreams. You can live the life you want. Blindness is not what holds you back.
And we're going to wrap our show up with the president and CEO, Mr. Lou Moneymaker of Bosma Enterprises. So, Lou, would you give us a parting shot?
Yeah, so we were talking about the need to come together as disability groups. I can't, until such a time that individual disability groups become less provincial and protect their turf, so to speak, we're not going to get where we want. But I would just plead to disability organizations out there, get together at the table, negotiate. It will be a negotiation. You got to get, and negotiation means you give up something to get something. You don't get everything that you want. Attitudinally, if we can get to that point and get disability groups to understand that, and that they will all get great benefit, even more so than acting alone, we can create that kind of a paradigm. Public policy about disability will finally become effective because that disability group will be together and organized and can have a big say in what happens in their own lives.
Well, we want to thank you all for joining us, and we will take that advice wholeheartedly. Thank you so much, Mr. Lou Moneymaker.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
All right, God bless you.
The National Federation of the Blind, Newsline, Indiana. For more information, go to nfb-in.org or call 855-963-6476. That's 855-963-6476. The National Federation of the Blind encourages you to live the life you want.